Long before the railroads tamed the West and maps filled in its blank spaces, there was one man who seemed to know every canyon, pass, and river bend of the Rocky Mountains by heart. Jim Bridger, a trapper, scout, storyteller, and survival expert. Bridger wasn't just a witness to the American frontier, he was the frontier. If you've ever wondered how settlers, soldiers, and fortune seekers made it through some of the harshest, wildest terrain in North America, chances are they followed Bridger's path, literally. So saddle up as we explore the life and legacy of one of the most legendary mountain men in Old West history. And if you love tales from the untamed frontier, full of danger, grit, and larger-than-life characters, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and join us on the trail. James Felix Bridger was a prominent figure of the early American frontier. Born into a Virginia family with English colonial roots, Bridger would grow into one of the most well-known mountain men, scouts and guides of the 19th century. His work primarily took place across the western territories of the United States during a time when the region was still largely unmapped and unfamiliar to European American settlers. Often referred to as Old Gabe in his later years, Bridger was part of the second generation of explorers who followed in the footsteps of the Lewis and Clark expedition. He joined fur trapping expeditions as a young man and quickly developed a deep familiarity with the rugged landscapes of the Rocky Mountains. Throughout his life, Bridger served in a variety of roles: scout for the U.S. Army, wilderness guide for emigrant parties, an occasional liaison between Native American tribes and newcomers moving west. His ability to communicate in multiple languages, including French, Spanish, and several Native American tongues, helped him build trust with diverse groups across the frontier. Bridger was especially known for his remarkable memory. According to those who traveled with him, he could recall complex geographical details with precision, effectively mapping large portions of the Rocky Mountains without the aid of written tools. This talent made him an invaluable guide for military campaigns, survey teams, and pioneers alike. Descriptions of Bridger in his prime portray him as tall, around 6 feet, with a strong, upright build. He was quick and agile, yet carried himself with a calm confidence. One observer remarked that his eyes had a sharpness, especially when he spoke about his experiences, giving the impression of a man deeply connected to the world he had spent decades exploring. His endurance and adaptability enabled him to survive and even thrive under the harsh conditions that defined life in the wilderness. From the northern reaches near present-day Canada to the valleys of southern Colorado, Bridger's name became synonymous with frontier knowledge, resilience, and quiet leadership. Jim Bridger's early life. James Felix Bridger was born on March the 17th, 1804, in Richmond, Virginia, into a family of early American settlers. His father, also named James Bridger, worked as an innkeeper in the bustling town of Richmond. His mother, Chloe Bridger, managed the household during a time when family stability was essential for survival and success. Around 1812, when James was still a young boy, the Bridger family relocated to the frontier town of St. Louis, Missouri. At the time, St. Louis was rapidly becoming a gateway to the vast and mostly uncharted Western territories, attracting traders, explorers, and ambitious families hoping to find new opportunities. Tragically, by the time James was 13 years old, he had lost both of his parents, leaving him an orphan. Without access to formal schooling, and like many children of his era, he entered a trade. He was apprenticed to a blacksmith, a common profession for young boys in need of stable work. It was during this time that Bridger began to develop the physical resilience and mechanical skills that would later serve him well in the wilderness. Although he never learned to read or write, a reality he lived with his entire life, Bridger showed an extraordinary ability to absorb information through observation and oral communication. Over the years, he became fluent or conversational in at least 7 languages, including French, Spanish, and several Native American languages, such as Crow and Shoshone. His language skills would become one of his greatest assets as he navigated the multicultural and often complex world of the early American frontier. On March 20th, 1822, at just 18 years old, Bridger made a life-changing decision. He left his blacksmith apprenticeship after responding to an advertisement published in the Missouri Republican, a prominent newspaper in St. Louis. The ad was placed by General William Henry Ashley, who was recruiting young men for a fur-trapping expedition up the Missouri River. This venture would mark the beginning of Bridger's lifelong journey into the wilderness. Among the men who joined the expedition were Jedediah Smith, Hugh Glass, and other individuals who would later gain fame as pioneering mountain men. Individuals who explored, trapped, and guided others across the vast and often unforgiving landscapes of the American West. Bridger's decision to join Ashley's expedition placed him on the leading edge of westward expansion. It also launched his transformation from an uneducated orphan into one of the most respected and knowledgeable frontiersmen of the 19th century. Jim Bridger's career. In 1830, Jim Bridger took a major step forward in his career on the western frontier. Along with a group of associates, he purchased interests in a fur trading business originally managed by Jedediah Smith, William Sublette, and others. The new ownership group renamed the venture the Rocky Mountain Fur Company, a name that would become synonymous with early American exploration and the booming fur trade of the era. For several years, Bridger and his partners operated in some of the most remote regions of the North American continent. Even after the eventual dissolution of the company in the late 1830s, Bridger remained active. He continued to explore vast sections of land stretching from the Canadian border to the southern reaches of Colorado, and from the Missouri River Basin to the high deserts of Idaho and Utah. His role shifted between that of a guide, a trader, and a frontier intermediary, adapting to the changes as the fur trade declined and migration routes expanded. Bridger's name is also frequently mentioned in relation to one of the most widely recounted frontier survival stories of the 19th century, the ordeal of Hugh Glass in 1823. At the time, Bridger was just 19 years old and employed by General William Henry Ashley. The incident took place in what is now Shade Hill, South Dakota, near the forks of the Grand River. According to various retellings, Glass became separated from his party while scouting for food and was severely injured by a large animal native to the region. A decision was made by the expedition leaders to leave 2 men behind to watch over him and report his fate. These men were John Fitzgerald and a younger associate identified in records as Bridges, which some believe may have referred to Bridger. While there is still historical uncertainty regarding whether Bridger was one of the men involved, the story has nonetheless become part of his broader legend. Reports claim the 2 men believed Glass would not survive, and they began preparing to leave the site. Later accounts suggest they left behind his equipment and caught up with the larger expedition, reporting that Glass had passed away. In a surprising turn, Glass managed to recover on his own and eventually rejoin civilization, sparking widespread public interest in his remarkable perseverance. Over time, the story of Hugh Glass has been adapted into literature and film, including the 1971 movie Man in the Wilderness and the 2015 film The Revenant. However, no definitive evidence places Jim Bridger at the scene, and in later years, when questioned by a historian, Bridger himself denied any involvement in abandoning Glass. This period, while debated, reveals the challenges of separating myth from fact in the lore of the Old West. Bridger's connection to the story, whether factual or mistaken, demonstrates how deeply intertwined he became with the wider narrative of frontier endurance and survival. Yellowstone and the Great Salt Lake. Jim Bridger holds an important place in the early exploration of the American West, particularly in areas that were still largely unknown to Euro-American settlers during the 1820s. Among his most significant accomplishments was his early journey into the Yellowstone region, a place rich with geothermal wonders and unique landscapes. In the autumn of 1824, Bridger became one of the first recorded non-native explorers to reach the Great Salt Lake, navigating its waters in a small, rudimentary watercraft known as a bull boat, a circular vessel traditionally constructed from buffalo hides stretched over a wooden frame. While native peoples had known the area for generations, Bridger's journey marked the beginning of the lake's introduction to European American maps and understanding. Bridger's exploration of Yellowstone is also noteworthy. He was among the first individuals of European descent to encounter the region's geysers, hot springs, and unusual geological features. His descriptions of the bubbling pools, steaming vents, and dramatic landscapes were initially met with skepticism by those unfamiliar with such terrain. Nevertheless, his accounts offered one of the earliest glimpses into what would later become Yellowstone National Park. One particularly fascinating observation he made was about a natural hydrological feature located just south of Yellowstone Lake. Bridger reported the existence of a spot where water from the same creek flowed in two different directions, one stream heading toward the Pacific Ocean and the other toward the Atlantic Ocean. This phenomenon, known today as the Continental Divide, is scientifically valid and underscores Bridger's keen eye for topographical detail. Sometime later, Bridger undertook a rafting journey down the Bighorn River, which was known for its challenging rapids and unpredictable currents. According to historical accounts, he was the only person at the time known to have attempted such a voyage and lived to tell the tale. His successful navigation of the river demonstrated not only physical courage, but also a deep understanding of Western waterways, river systems, and the natural environment. Bridger's early expeditions helped chart unknown territories and shape the growing body of geographic knowledge in the early 19th century. More than just a fur trapper or scout, he was an astute observer of nature and a critical link between the known and the unexplored American frontier. Guide and advisor. In 1843, Jim Bridger, alongside fellow frontiersman Louis Vasquez, established a key trading post known as Fort Bridger. Located on the Black's Fork of the Green River, in what is now southwestern Wyoming, this site became a vital rest stop along the heavily traveled Oregon Trail. At the time, the westward expansion was in full swing, and Fort Bridger served not only as a trading post but also as a resupply station and an informal information hub for immigrants moving westward. By this point in his life, Bridger had been deeply involved in exploring, trapping, and trailblazing across the western frontier for over 2 decades. His extensive knowledge of the terrain, weather patterns, and Native American cultures made him a trusted wilderness guide. Travelers often sought out his advice, knowing he could size up a wagon train or group and offer personalized guidance based on their specific needs and destinations. In 1846, the ill-fated Donner Party passed through Fort Bridger. Bridger and Vasquez reportedly recommended a new route promoted by Lansford Hastings, later called the Hastings Cutoff. They described the path ahead as relatively smooth, with sufficient water and grazing land, except for one known 40-mile waterless segment. Unfortunately, this section turned out to be twice as long as expected, about 80 miles, and much more difficult than advertised. The delay caused by this misinformation contributed to the Donner Party becoming trapped in the Sierra Nevada mountains, where many perished during the harsh winter. While there's debate over Bridger's intentions, historians still examine his role and whether he knowingly encouraged the shortcut to boost traffic to Fort Bridger. During the Utah War from July 1857 to July 1858, Bridger was employed as a guide by the U.S. government. This brief, non-combative conflict between Mormon settlers in Utah Territory and the federal government saw Bridger's regional expertise put to use by military forces attempting to navigate and supply troops in remote terrain. In 1859, Bridger joined the Reynolds expedition to Yellowstone, serving as its chief guide. Led by Captain William F. Reynolds, the expedition aimed to map and explore parts of the northern Rocky Mountains. Although the party was forced to turn back due to deep snow in the Yellowstone region, they still managed to explore other key locations, such as Jackson Hole and Pierre's Hole, areas now recognized for their natural beauty and historical significance. In 1861, Bridger lent his services as a guide to Edward L. Berthoud, who was surveying potential transportation routes through the Rocky Mountains, including what would later become Berthoud Pass in Colorado. His continued involvement in such expeditions highlights the ongoing value placed on his skills well into his later years. Between October 1863 and April 1864, Bridger worked out of Fort Laramie, again offering his guidance during a period of rising tensions between native tribes and the U.S. military. During Red Cloud's War, a conflict stemming from disputes over travel routes and encroachment into native territories, Bridger acted as a scout under Colonel Henry B. Carrington. He was stationed at Fort Phil Kearny during two notable events, the Fetterman Fight and the Wagon Box Fight. While Bridger did not directly participate in these battles, his presence at the fort reflects the reliance military leaders had on his frontier knowledge, particularly in navigating complex relationships with native nations and harsh landscapes. On July 21, 1868, Bridger was officially discharged from service. Suffering from rheumatism and an enlarged thyroid condition known as goiter, he returned to Missouri, where his health steadily declined. Despite his many years of service and contributions to westward expansion, Bridger struggled financially in his final years. He attempted, unsuccessfully, to collect back rent from the federal government for its use of Fort Bridger. By 1875, his eyesight had failed completely, and he lived the remainder of his life in obscurity. Though respected by those who remembered his frontier legacy, his story, once central to the tale of the West, faded until later historians revived interest in his extraordinary contributions. Bridger Pass and the Bridger Trail. In 1850, while guiding the return journey of the Stansbury expedition from Utah Territory, Jim Bridger made a significant geographical discovery. As the expedition wound its way back eastward, Bridger identified a previously underused mountain crossing through the Rocky Mountains. This route, later named Bridger Pass in his honor, offered a practical and efficient alternative to the well-traveled South Pass. Located in what is now south-central Wyoming, Bridger Pass proved to be more than just a new trail. It shortened the traditional Oregon Trail by approximately 61 miles, which was a meaningful reduction in time and effort for emigrants making the long journey to the western frontier. This alternate route was not only quicker, it also helped distribute travel across less congested terrain, which eased the burden on overused paths and resources. Over time, Bridger Pass gained lasting significance. Its strategic location made it the preferred path across the Continental Divide for a variety of key transportation developments in the West. It became part of the route for the Overland Stage Company, which carried passengers and mail, the famed Pony Express, which provided high-speed communication across the frontier in the early 1860s. The Union Pacific Railroad, which helped complete the Transcontinental Railroad, and eventually the modern Interstate 80, one of the major east-west highways in the United States today. This evolution illustrates how Bridger's frontier knowledge helped shape not just trails, but the broader infrastructure of the American West. In 1864, Bridger once again used his deep understanding of the terrain to create a safer path through contested areas. He mapped what became known as the Bridger Trail, a northern route designed to move settlers and prospectors from Wyoming into the newly discovered gold fields of Montana. Unlike the Bozeman Trail, which cut directly through territories claimed and defended by Native American nations, the Bridger Trail followed a more westerly course intended to minimize conflict. Although more rugged and less direct, the trail offered a peaceful alternative during a time of mounting tension in the region. By 1865, as conflict on the plains continued to grow, Bridger was called into government service once again. That year, he was appointed Chief of Scouts for the Powder River Expedition, a U.S. military campaign intended to assert federal presence and facilitate road construction in areas north of the Platte River. Though the goals of the expedition were controversial and met with strong resistance from native tribes, Bridger's role was primarily to help lead troops safely through unfamiliar terrain using the skills he had refined over decades. The family and death of Jim Bridger. In 1835, Jim Bridger entered into a union with a woman from the Flathead Nation, whom he called Emma. This marriage marked the beginning of his family life on the frontier, and together they had 3 children. As was common for fur traders of the era, Bridger's marriage also represented a cultural alliance, strengthening his relationships with native communities and facilitating his work as a trapper, interpreter, and guide. These types of marriages were central to many frontiersmen's lives, blending personal and professional ties in the context of the multicultural American West. Emma passed away in 1846, reportedly from a fever, which was a frequent and often fatal occurrence in a time when medical care was limited and outbreaks spread quickly among both native and settler populations. Her death was a personal loss that marked a transition in Bridger's life. Following her passing, Bridger married again, this time to the daughter of a Shoshone chief. This marriage also reflected the deep connections he maintained with native tribes, especially the Shoshone, with whom he worked closely throughout his life. Sadly, this second wife died during childbirth around 1849, a tragic and not uncommon reality for women on the frontier, where medical assistance during labor was often unavailable. In 1850, Bridger married for a third time, this time to Mary Washakie, the daughter of Chief Washakie, a respected leader of the Shoshone people known for his diplomatic skill and advocacy for his people's interests. Mary and Jim Bridger raised two children together, continuing the family lineage and deepening Bridger's enduring ties to the Shoshone community. His family was part of the intricate web of relationships that defined the cultural borderlands of the American West. Recognizing the importance of education, Bridger arranged for some of his children to be sent east for schooling, a decision that underscored his awareness of the changing world and the opportunities that formal education might offer in the increasingly Americanized landscape. His family life, however, was marked by a series of profound personal losses. His eldest daughter, Mary Ann, was taken by members of the Cayuse tribe during the events surrounding the Whitman massacre in 1847. Though she was later released, she died soon after, likely due to the physical and emotional toll of her ordeal. The Whitman massacre, a violent flashpoint in Oregon country, had wide-reaching consequences for native settler relations and deeply affected families connected to the region. Bridger's son, Felix, who had joined the Missouri Artillery during the Civil War era, later passed away from illness while living on his father's farm. Like many soldiers of the time, Felix faced more danger from disease than from battle, a grim reality of 19th century warfare and healthcare conditions. Another daughter, Josephine, married the well-known frontiersman Jim Baker, but she too died prematurely, leaving behind more grief for Bridger. In the end, it was his daughter Virginia who became his primary caregiver and the only one of his children to survive him. By 1867, Bridger's health began to decline noticeably. In his early 60s, he experienced serious vision problems, which impaired his ability to function in the way he once had, especially in frontier activities that had long defined his identity. His eyesight continued to worsen, and by the early 1870s, he could no longer recognize people unless they spoke, relying on familiar voices instead of faces. By 1875, Bridger had become completely blind. During his final years, he lived under Virginia's care, no longer traveling or exploring, but quietly living out the end of his life on his farm near Kansas City, Missouri. There on July 17, 1881, Jim Bridger passed away at the age of 77. His death marked the end of a life that had spanned the early fur trade era, westward expansion, and the beginnings of modern America, an extraordinary bridge between cultures, centuries, and landscapes. Jim Bridger Legacy. Jim Bridger is often remembered as one of the most colorful figures of the American frontier, a man whose life blended deep exploration, cultural mediation, and an unmistakable flair for storytelling. As a mountain man, trail guide, and interpreter, Bridger's legacy is tied not only to the thousands of miles he traveled, but also to the vivid stories he left behind. Throughout his lifetime, Bridger earned respect for his practical skills, navigating rivers, crossing mountains, and guiding immigrant wagon trains across untamed landscapes. But he was just as well known for his ability to capture the imagination of listeners around a campfire. His tales were often as bold as the terrain he traveled, walking the line between eyewitness testimony and tall tale. One of his most famous anecdotes involved the remarkable geothermal features of what is now Yellowstone National Park. Bridger spoke of geysers, boiling springs, and steaming landscapes that sounded unbelievable to those who had never seen them. At the time, many dismissed these stories as exaggeration or pure frontier fiction. Yet years later, scientific exploration confirmed that Bridger had indeed described these features with a surprising degree of accuracy, making him one of the earliest non-indigenous sources to recount the natural wonders of the Yellowstone region. Other tales he told were more whimsical and clearly intended to entertain. In one memorable yarn, Bridger described stumbling upon a petrified forest where not only were the trees turned to stone, but even the birds were petrified, still perched on branches, singing petrified songs. This tale, although clearly fantastical, may have been inspired by the real petrified wood deposits near Tower Junction, an area rich in ancient volcanic history. It's a testament to Bridger's talent that he could take natural phenomena and spin them into enchanting folklore. As his fame spread, so did the stories. Over time, many tales, true, fictional, or somewhere in between, were attributed to him whether he had told them or not. Bridger became something of a frontier legend, a symbol of the rugged but imaginative spirit of the American West. His name was often attached to any tall tale that needed a colorful narrator, regardless of the original storyteller. One of his favorite stories, especially when entertaining newcomers to the West, involved a dramatic escape from danger. In the tale, Bridger claimed to have been chased for miles by 100 Cheyenne riders, eventually reaching the dead end of a box canyon with no clear way out. He would pause at this point in the story, letting the suspense build, when his wide-eyed listener would inevitably ask, "What happened then, Mr. Bridger?" He was said to reply dryly, "They killed me." His stories, whether factual or fanciful, played a vital role in shaping how the American public imagined the West. Through exaggeration, wit, and genuine observation, Bridger helped construct the mythic landscape of the frontier in the minds of generations to come. Jim Bridger wasn't just a mountain man, he was the mountain. From charting unknown territory to trading with tribes and spinning tall tales around frontier campfires, Bridger helped carve out the very roadmap of the American West. His name may not be as flashy as some gunslingers or gold rushers, but without Bridger, the Rocky Mountains might have remained a mystery a little longer. If you enjoyed learning about one of the toughest, most trail-savvy figures in frontier history, saddle up and hit that subscribe button. There's a whole frontier of stories waiting for you. Don't miss the next ride into the wild, weird, and unforgettable Old West.